She came into town with a sack of cornmeal, a small jar of salt, and her mama's name still hanging over her like a heavy coat in summer. Folks remembered Lorna Mayfield for her peach pies and quick temper. They remembered the way she used to lean against the counter at Gentry's store, daring anyone to call her soft just because she smiled too easy. But it had been 5 years since Lorna passed, and her daughter Joelle had grown tired of people calling her Little Lorna, like she was a ghost come back wrong. She wasn't her mama. She didn't cook for compliments. She cooked to eat. She cooked to stay busy, so the grief didn't crawl into bed with her at night. The day Joelle met Lane, she'd been trying to trade a bag of dried beans for some firewood. Her hands were red from the cold, her boots cracked. She had the kind of look that said she didn't want help, but might still take it if it didn't come with pity. He was leaning against the back of a wagon, watching her argue with the storekeeper like it was a game. His hat was pulled low, hiding most of his face, but when she turned and caught his eye, she saw the cut of a man who knew what hunger felt like. Not just the kind that ate at your stomach, but the kind that chewed at your soul when the world forgot your name. Lane had only come to Blackstone Ridge because his brother was dying. They hadn't spoken in years. Not since the war. Not since Lane left with blood on his hands and silence in his throat. His brother, Ethan, was the only person who ever really tried to understand what the war did to him. But now Ethan was wasting away from some lung sickness and didn't have much time left. Lane had planned to stay just long enough to bury him proper, then keep riding west. He didn't count on meeting a girl with dirt on her hem and too much truth in her voice. She said straight, "I ain't my mama, but I can cook with heart," after he asked if she needed help chopping wood. She didn't even look up when she said it, just swung the axe again like her own words didn't matter much. But something about the way she said with heart made Lane pause. He hadn't felt anything warm in a long time, and there it was in her voice, in the way she moved, in the little house she was trying to keep standing on cracked beams in prayer. Ethan lived just up the hill from her, and as the days passed, Lane kept crossing paths with Joelle. He told himself it was by accident, but he knew better. She cooked cornbread that didn't rise right, eggs that were always just a bit too runny, but she did it like it meant something, like it was an act of defiance against everything the world had taken from her. Lane started bringing firewood without asking. He fixed her porch rail one morning and didn't wait around to be thanked. Joelle didn't like owing anyone, but she didn't fight him. There was a quiet sadness in him that didn't press against hers. Most men try to fix her or try to tell her she was broken. Lane didn't say much at all, just nodded when she spoke, let her silence sit next to his, and brought her peaches one afternoon like it wasn't a big deal. She hadn't tasted peaches since the summer her mama died. But trouble doesn't skip a house just because it's already broken. One cold night, while Ethan coughed his lungs out in the next room, Lane came back to find Joelle sitting on her steps with a rifle across her knees. A man from out near the canyon had been sniffing around, said he used to know her mama, said Joelle owed him something. Lane didn't ask what. He just sat beside her, quiet, and waited for her to speak. She told him about how her mama used to take in boarders, men passing through with nothing but hunger and eyes that wandered too much. One of them must have been this man. He showed up last week asking about the land, saying her mama promised it to him. Joelle knew it was a lie. Her mama died with nothing but debts. But lies stick better when a woman's alone. And Joelle had been alone for too long. Lane felt something twist in him then. Not anger, not quite. It was deeper, like a growl under the ribs. He'd seen men like that during the war. The kind who thought the world owed them just for surviving. The kind who mistook kindness for weakness. He told her he'd handle it. She looked at him then, real close, and nodded once like she already knew he would. Ethan died the next morning. Lane buried him on the hill just as the sun cracked over the trees. Joelle brought bread and a tin of coffee, and they didn't speak until the ground was packed down. Lane didn't cry. He just stood there, fingers trembling like maybe if he stayed still enough, he wouldn't fall apart. Joelle stood beside him, her hand near his but not touching, and for a moment, he let himself believe that maybe this town had something left in it for him. But the man came back that same night. And this time, he wasn't alone. 3 riders. One with a rope, one with a bottle, and the last with the kind of grin that made Joel's stomach turn. They didn't come to talk. They came to scare. Lane was ready. Not with a gun. He didn't carry one no more, but with his fist, his quiet rage, and a shovel he hadn't put down since Ethan's funeral. They didn't win, but Joelle's window shattered. Her table splintered, and Lane bled from a split lip that tasted like copper and old regrets. After it was done, she touched his cheek, real light, and said, "You didn't have to." He looked at her through the pain and said, "But I needed to." And for the first time in a long while, something in her chest unclenched. The world was still mean. The nights were still long. But Lane kept showing up with kind eyes and steady hands. Joelle kept cooking with heart. And slowly, the weight of her mama's name began to lift. Because love, real love, don't always arrive with roses or poems. Sometimes it comes in with split knuckles, a quiet promise, and cornbread that's a little too salty. And Joelle wasn't her mama. But that was all the cowboy needed to hear. Lane hadn't always been quiet. Before the war, before the blood and the fire and the long ride west with no real destination, he was a boy who sang on fence posts and smiled too often for a ranch hand. Folks in his hometown remembered him as the one who never raised his voice, even when the cattle broke loose or the barn caught fire that summer. He had an older brother, Ethan, who always got into fights, who always came home with a bruised knuckle or a busted lip. But Lane kept things inside. Ethan used to joke that his little brother had more storm clouds in his chest than the prairie sky before a downpour. But the war had changed them both. Ethan came back coughing. Lane came back silent. Whatever they had left, they buried in different ways. Ethan in the dry land of Blackstone Ridge, Lane in long miles of dirt roads and nights spent sleeping under cedar trees. When the telegram came saying Ethan didn't have much time, Lane hadn't hesitated. He packed what little he had and rode straight into the place he'd sworn he'd never settle in again. Joelle's story wasn't cleaner. After her mama passed, she was left with a house falling apart in a town that only looked her in the eye when they needed something. Her daddy had run off when she was 9. Some folks said he went east, others said he got himself shot in Abilene. Joelle didn't care either way. She learned early not to expect someone to come back once they left. Her mama raised her hard but right, taught her how to go to fish and patch a roof, how to lie quiet when a man at the door didn't come with kind eyes. But Lorna Mayfield was no saint. She'd taken money where she could, let men rent out the back room when the winters were too cold. It kept them fed. It also kept gossip rolling through town like tumbleweed. Joelle knew what folks thought of her, and she didn't waste time trying to change their minds. She worked her garden, fixed what she could, and let the rest rot. Until Lane showed up, she hadn't talked to anyone outside the store clerk and her old neighbor, Miss Edna. Miss Edna was half blind, mostly deaf, but sharp as nails when it came to people. She'd known Joelle since she was born. Back when Lane first brought her firewood, Edna had noticed. From her creaky rocker, she watched the man's slow steps, the way he didn't knock, just left what was needed and walked off. One afternoon, she told Joelle, that man's either running from hell or walking towards something he don't understand yet. Joelle didn't answer, but she kept her eyes open after that. Another piece of Joelle's past came knocking too. Her cousin Dell, who hadn't written in 2 years, rolled into town with nothing but a saddlebag and a sly grin. Dell was the kind of man who always found trouble and somehow always slipped away before it stuck. Joelle didn't trust him, but she let him sleep in the barn anyway. Said it was only for a night, but Dell never meant just one night. He started showing up at her porch, asking questions about Lane, poking at the soft spots with that laugh of his. "You sure you know what he's hiding?" Dell asked once, as they hauled water from the creek. Men like him, they come quiet for a reason. Joelle didn't answer. She just hauled harder. Dell didn't leave, and soon Lane began to feel the change. He'd ride into town and catch men staring too long. The sheriff, old McCrae, gave him a look one morning that stuck like a splinter. McCrae was slow to speak and slow to trust. He'd seen too many drifters pass through only to leave a mess behind. The fact that Lane had stayed past Ethan's burial had folks whispering. That he was helping Joel now just made it louder. The man who came with the rope and the bottle. His name was Silas Ward. He was older now, with silver streaks in his beard and teeth the color of old paper. He used to stay in Joel's mama's spare room during the winters. Claimed Lorna owed him land for his investments. Claimed he had papers. But the law in Blackstone Ridge was as worn as the roads, and most justice came with who could shout louder or scare better. Silas wasn't alone anymore either. He had two younger men riding with him, mean ones, the kind who pulled triggers before they asked names. Lane knew men like that. He'd fought beside them, fought against them too. It didn't matter the flag. Some men just liked the sound of fear in other people's throats. Still, Lane didn't carry a gun. He'd made a promise, to himself, to whatever God still listened. No more shooting. Not after what happened in those burned-out barns west of Franklin Ridge. Not after he looked into a boy's face and saw nothing but the life he'd stolen. Ethan used to say Lane had a good heart. Said it like a curse. So Lane fought in other ways. He fixed fences, patched Joel's roof without asking, taught her how to hold a hammer so the head wouldn't twist in her palm. He listened, really listened, and Joel, bit by bit, let herself lean into the quiet. But Dell was a mouth that never stayed shut. He took one of Joel's pies into town and bragged about her. Said she was baking like her mama. Said she had a man now. It wasn't true. Not yet, but the lie spread fast. A woman like Joel didn't get second chances in a town like Blackstone. Not without a price. Soon, someone carved a word into her door. W asterisk 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 E. She scrubbed it off before Lane saw it. But her hands shook for hours. That night, she didn't cook. She sat on the back steps, staring into the trees, arms crossed like they could hold her together. Lane found her there and sat beside her. Didn't say a word. Just sat. That was the night she told him about her mama's last days. About the bleeding, the fever, the way she screamed for water that wasn't there. How Joel had walked 5 miles barefoot to fetch the preacher, only to hear him say, "Some things can't be prayed away." Lane didn't speak, but he looked at her like he understood, like he'd seen things that couldn't be washed out either. Tension built slowly after that. Silas started showing up at the store, leaning too close to Miss Edna's porch, asking questions he didn't need answers to. Dell kept drinking, getting louder, saying he could settle things with Silas if she'd just let him handle it like a man. Joel told him no. Every time. But Dell didn't like no. He started looking at her like her daddy used to, angry at the world and looking for someone smaller to take it out on. It all came to a head the day the sheriff called Lane in. Told him someone filed a complaint. Said he'd been threatening Joel's cousin. Lane didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. But when he left the office, his hands were clenched so tight they left half-moon bruises in his palms. Joel didn't know what to do. She was tired of fighting, tired of wondering if someone would kick her door in at night. She started thinking about selling the place, taking what little she had and heading west. Maybe Oregon, maybe nowhere. She told Lane this one night while they sat under the stars, her voice cracked and raw. "I ain't strong like my mama," she said. "I can't keep doing this alone." "You ain't alone," Lane said. "Not anymore." And she believed him. She wanted to believe him. But in towns like Blackstone Ridge, believing in something was dangerous. It meant you had something to lose. And Joelle was starting to realize that maybe, for the first time in her life, she did. It started with the smallest things. Things Joelle barely noticed at first. A bucket already filled before she made her morning walk to the well. Chopped wood neatly stacked under the porch before she asked. A piece of warm bread left by Lane when she'd skipped dinner from being too tired to chew. It wasn't grand gestures, and maybe that's why they meant more. After years of surviving, of measuring her worth by what she could carry and fix on her own, Joelle had grown used to silence. But now that silence felt shared, and slowly, It didn't feel like loneliness anymore. Lane stayed longer each day. At first, he kept to the yard, fixing fences or tending Ethan's overgrown garden. But then he started sitting on the porch steps while she cooked, resting his elbows on his knees, watching the wind roll across the tall grass like it was telling stories. She wasn't sure what shifted, but one night she found herself telling him about her mama's peach pie recipe, the one she still couldn't get right, no matter how many tries. Lane didn't laugh. He just asked, "What if it ain't about getting it right?" That stuck with her. She went inside, rolled out the crust too thick, burnt the edges, and when she brought it back out, he ate every bite without flinching. "I taste hard," he said. "That's more than most folks ever learn to put in a pie." She looked at him, confused for a second, and then just nodded, lips tugging into something halfway between a smile and disbelief. It was one of the first real smiles he'd seen on her face. The days warmed, and with them, Joelle. Her sleeves rolled up higher. Her hair came undone a little more often. She hummed sometimes, just quiet under her breath. The land still cracked and leaned, and the roof still sagged at one corner. But something about the house felt different. Less like a tomb, more like a place someone lived. Lane noticed the smell of stew when he passed her window. He noticed how she started setting 2 bowls out instead of one. Sometimes they talked until the lantern burned down low. She told him about her childhood, about how she once tried to run away to Missouri at 12, how she'd slept in the church until someone found her and brought her home. He told her about Ethan, about the fights, the laughter, the way Ethan used to sing off-key while fixing the fence. Lane's voice cracked when he said Ethan's name sometimes, but he didn't hide it. Joelle liked that about him. He never made grief look pretty. One afternoon, Lane helped her fix the back shed door. They'd been working in silence, sun hot on their necks, when she glanced at him and said, "I can't remember the last time someone stayed this long." He didn't look up, just tightened a nail and said, "Then I'll stay a while longer." And that was that. Miss Edna watched it all from her porch. She smiled more, too. Smiled in that way old women do when they see something real blooming where nothing had grown in years. "You got the same look your mama did when she fell in love," she said to Joelle one morning. Joelle flushed, her jaw tightening. "I ain't her." "I know," Edna said, "but you're still allowed to feel what she felt." That night, Joelle cooked real careful. Fried chicken, greens, cornbread that rose just the way she wanted. She even opened the window, let the breeze in. Lane came in late, hands dirty from fixing a neighbor's gate. And when he sat down at the table and saw the spread, he blinked like he'd forgotten how to be invited. "You cooked all this?" he asked. She shrugged. "You've been lifting hammers all day. Figured you earned more than crusts." He sat down slowly. The silence between them stretched, warm now, not heavy. They ate slow, the air between them thick with something neither could name yet. When Lane stood to leave, Joelle followed him to the porch. She reached for his sleeve, fingers brushing his arm, and said, "You don't have to go just yet." Lane turned, heart caught in his throat, and nodded once. He sat back down, the moonlight painting their faces silver. They didn't talk that night. They didn't need to. But peace don't last long when the world's set against it. Silas Ward hadn't forgotten about the land. Word was he'd gone up the county to dig up papers. Dell had been drinking heavier, mouthing off in town that Joelle didn't know what she was doing, that she was letting some stranger play house where a real man should stand. Sheriff McCrae started asking more questions, knocking on Joelle's door with his hat in his hands and a frown carved into his face. "You're stirring things up," he said to Lane one afternoon. "I don't know what your intentions are, but folks around here remember what happened when Ethan came back from the war. We don't need another storm." Lane didn't answer. He just tipped his hat and walked away. He didn't tell Joelle what the sheriff said, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he stared a little longer at the horizon each night like he was waiting for something bad to ride in. She asked him once if he was thinking about leaving. He looked at her and said, "No, but I keep wondering if staying will cost you too much." Joelle didn't answer. She just moved closer, resting her forehead against his chest. It was the first time they touched without accident. The first time she let herself need someone. But the storm did come. Not all at once. Just small cracks first. Miss Edna found her front window shattered one morning, a dead crow nailed to the door. Joelle's garden was torn up one night. Roots yanked, rows trampled. Dell disappeared for 3 days, then came back with bruises and a wild look in his eye, saying Silas had offered him money to sign over his part of the land. "You don't own anything," Joelle snapped. He grinned, crooked and bitter. "Neither do you. Not if Silas gets his way." Lane tried to reason with the sheriff, but there was no law worth a damn that could stop a lie once it was rolling through a town's veins. So they kept their heads down. Lane stayed busy, Joelle kept cooking, and little by little, they carved out something soft beneath the hard edges of their lives. One afternoon, Joelle found Lane sitting with Edna, reading aloud from a crumpled book of poems. The image stopped her cold. Lane, big and quiet and always half-shadowed, reading in a low, steady voice while Edna nodded along like she'd known that voice all her life. When he saw Joelle standing there, he paused, a little embarrassed. "You want to join us?" he asked, lifting the book. She didn't say anything. She just walked over, sat beside him, and leaned her shoulder into his. Later that week, they went walking down by the creek. The sun was soft, the air smelled like warm dirt and honeysuckle. Joelle skipped a stone, laughing when it sunk after one skip. "You were supposed to teach me how to do it," she said. "I did," Lane said, grinning. "You just didn't listen." She splashed water at him, and for the first time, Lane laughed. Full and real. The sound of it startled her. It startled him too. They stood there, dripping and breathless, and when he stepped closer and kissed her, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Not rushed, not broken, just quiet and needed. She didn't pull away. She didn't think of her mama. She just closed her eyes and held on. Hope was a fragile thing, but it was starting to grow. In between the fear and the tension, in between the gossip and the threats, something good was taking root. Joelle made another pie the next day. This one came out perfect. She set it on the table, looked at Lane, and said, "I don't know if we'll win, but if we're going to lose, I'd rather lose with someone beside me." Lane reached for her hand, squeezed it. "Then we won't lose," he said. Not really. She wanted to believe him. And for a little while longer, she did. The pie cooled untouched on the windowsill. Joelle had baked it early that morning, hoping to lift the weight in Lane's chest. But by the time the crust turned golden, the town had turned colder. Word spread that Silas Ward had returned from county with papers, old, yellowed things with frayed edges, and a signature Joelle swore was forged. But the problem wasn't the paper. The problem was that folks in Blackstone Ridge wanted it to be real. They wanted to believe the land didn't belong to a girl they never saw smile, a girl whose mama had taken in drifters and owed debts she never repaid. The sheriff knocked just before sundown. He didn't come with anger, just resignation. His voice was tight when he said it. The county was opening an investigation into ownership of the Mayfield homestead. That meant Joelle couldn't make any changes to the land. Not the garden, not the fence, not the roof Lane had promised to finish patching next week. She didn't cry. Not when a sheriff left. Not when the wind banged the shutters. Not even when Lane sat across from her that night, silent and angry in a way she didn't recognize. He stared at his plate like the food would explain something, like maybe it had answers. "I should have seen this coming," he said finally. "It's not your fault," Joelle said, but her voice was thin. Lane didn't reply. He just pushed his food around, shoulders tight. She waited for him to reach for her hand like he usually did, but he didn't. That night, he didn't stay. Joelle didn't sleep. The house felt like it was shrinking again, like it had when her mama died and the nights were too quiet. The fear came creeping back in, the old kind, the kind that whispered she was alone again and would always be. Lane didn't show up the next morning. She told herself he was probably talking to Edna or back at Ethan's place, clearing brush. But as the hours stretched, something sour started to rise in her throat. Lane, meanwhile, had taken his horse up into the ridge, where the wind cut cold and the pines grew tight. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that the world down below felt like it was pressing in on him. When he reached the spot where he used to sit as a boy, just a big, flat stone under a hickory tree, he dropped to his knees and sat like that for a long time. He told himself he wouldn't run again. He swore it, standing over Ethan's grave. But he could feel the pull, the voice in his head telling him that every time he stayed, someone else paid the price. He thought about Franklin Ridge, about the fire, the crying, the boy in the red coat. His hands still trembled sometimes at night. He never told Joelle the full story. He didn't think she'd stay if she knew. When he finally came back to town, it was dark. Joelle's lamp was lit, but the door was shut. He stood on the porch for a minute before knocking. She opened it, face unreadable. "Where were you?" she asked. Thinking don't help if you don't come back. Her voice wasn't angry. It was just tired. He wanted to pull her into his arms, tell her he wasn't going anywhere. But he hesitated, and that silence, that heartbeat of hesitation, broke something. "I can't do this if you're going to disappear every time it gets hard," she said. "I've had enough of that. I grew up with it, lived it. I don't need another man riding off when the wind shifts." "I'm not." "Yes, you are. Right now, you are." Lane looked down. "I just needed time." Joelle stepped back, opened the door wider. "Then go ahead. Take it." He didn't walk through. Not that night. Joelle shut the door, sat down on the floor, back against the wood, and stared at the wall for what felt like hours. The pie on the windowsill was cold and forgotten. The next few days blurred. Dell came knocking again, this time talking sweet, pretending to care. But Joelle saw the desperation behind his smile. He was scared. Silas had pushed him too far, offered him a deal, and now expected something in return. Joelle knew her cousin. He wouldn't protect her. He'd hand her the deed if it kept his own neck clear. Miss Edna tried to bring comfort, brought over soup, offered to help with the garden, even though her knees ached. "You know what you're made of, girl," she said softly. "But sometimes even strong people get tired." Joelle nodded, but inside, she felt hollow. Lane kept his distance. He worked on Ethan's property, slept on the porch in the cold, told himself he was doing the right thing by giving her space. But the ache in his chest grew with every day he didn't see her. He remembered the way she laughed when the cornbread came out burnt, the way she looked at him under the lantern glow, and he hated himself for hesitating. He thought about the fire again. Franklin Ridge. It had started with orders. Burn the barn. Drive them out. He lit the match. Never asked who was inside. Never knew there was a child asleep in the loft until it was too late. He told Ethan years later. Ethan never judged him. Said Ward chewed men up and spat them out wrong. But Lane never forgave himself. And now, looking at Joelle's house from a distance, he wondered if he was still doing the same thing, ruining what didn't deserve to be ruined. Joelle, meanwhile, had taken to waking early again, starting the fire before the sun rose. It reminded her of the years after her mama died, when she kept busy to keep from thinking. But this time it hurt more, because this time she'd let herself hope. She had let someone in. She had let someone matter. When she finally saw Lane again, it was by accident. She was walking back from town, basket under her arm, eyes set on the dirt road. He came around the bend on horseback. They stopped a few feet apart. "You look tired," he said. She didn't answer right away. Then, "I am." Lane got off the horse, stood beside her. "I've been scared." She looked at him then. Really looked. Of what? Of being the man who ruins things. "I have been, Joe. I've done things I ain't proud of. Things that don't go away. I ain't asking you to be clean," she said. "I'm asking you to stay. That's all I've ever needed from anyone. Just to stay." Lane stepped closer. "I want to, but I need you to know what you're staying with." "Then tell me," she said. So he did. He told her about the fire, about the match, about the child, about how that scream still echoed sometimes in his dreams. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She said, "You carry it like it still belongs to you. But it doesn't. Not all of it. I don't know how to let it go." Then we carry it together. Lane cried then. Not loud, just quiet, like the sound had been waiting years to escape. They walked back together, side by side. No promises, just presence. But trouble hadn't forgotten them. The next day, a notice was nailed to Joelle's door. Court summons. Silas had filed official claim to the land. Joelle read it, folded it, and placed it on the table. Her hand shook, but her voice was calm when she said, "Then we fight." Lane didn't hesitate this time. He just said, "I'm with you." It wasn't the ending. Not yet. But the fear that once separated them had been named. And that was the beginning of something stronger than the lies circling outside their door. The courtroom in Blackstone Ridge wasn't much. A long wooden bench, dust on the floor, and a judge who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Still, it held the weight of everything Joelle had worked for, everything Lane had tried to keep buried. The townsfolk filled the benches, some out of boredom, some out of spite, others out of the quiet hope they'd see something true unfold. Silas Ward sat in the front row with his papers, a stiff black coat, and the look of a man who thought the world owed him land just for being patient. Joelle wore her mama's dress, forest green, frayed at the cuffs. Her hands were steady as she stood before the judge, though her heart pounded like it was trying to break free. Lane stood behind her, silent and strong, the same way he had been since the night he came back. He hadn't slept much, not since telling her the full truth. And now, here he was, standing beside her in the same town that still whispered behind her back. The judge opened the proceedings slow, calling out names, laying out the land claims. Silas's lawyer stood and spoke first, waving around a deed dated nearly 15 years back. An agreement between Mr. Ward and the late Lorna Mayfield, the man said, placing the yellowed paper on the table like it was God's word. He gave her money. She gave her word. Joelle didn't flinch. She'd heard those words before. Her mama had taken help when help was all there was. That didn't mean she'd promised anything in return. "I was 13 when that paper was signed," Joelle said when it was her turn. "If my mama signed something, she never told me. And Mr. Ward never lived here. He stayed some nights when it was cold, paid in beans and whiskey. That don't make him family. That don't make this his home." There was a low murmur through the room. Someone cleared their throat in the back. The judge tapped the gavel once, more out of form and force. Silas stood. His voice was calm, almost sweet. "Your mama was a good woman, but she was tired. She made a deal with me. Said if I helped her keep the house, the land would come to me when she passed." Lane stepped forward then. "Did she sign it in front of a witness?" Silas didn't answer right away. It was private. Just us. Lane looked at the judge. "Then it ain't legal." The lawyer objected. Voices rose. The judge waved his hands. "What do you know about the law, boy?" Silas snapped, eyes sharp. Lane's jaw tensed. He stepped closer to the table. "I know a lie when I see one. And I know a man who leans on the dead to take from the living." The room quieted. Silas turned, cold and sure. "And who are you to talk about the dead?" The question wasn't for the judge. It was for Lane, and it landed like a hammer to the chest. Lane didn't answer. Not yet. The judge asked Joelle if she had anything else to show. She shook her head. "Just the house. Just what I've kept standing all these years. That's all I have." Outside the courthouse, a storm was building. Clouds low and gray, wind cutting sharp through the street. Inside, the silence after Joelle's words was thick. Then Lane stepped forward again. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at Joelle. "I have something to say," he said. "Not about land. About truth." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Lane cleared his throat. The room leaned in. "I was a soldier," he began. "Fought for the Union. Did things I can't undo. There was a night, late in the war, when we were told to burn a barn out west. Said there were rebels hiding supplies there. We lit it. Watched it burn. Afterward, I found a boy inside. No older than 10. Curled in the hay." He paused. His hands shook. "I told myself I didn't know. That I was following orders. But it don't matter. I lit the match. I lived with that." Joelle's eyes were wide, but she didn't move. "I came here to bury my brother," Lane continued. Figured I'd disappear again after. But then I met her, and I started thinking maybe I could fix something. Not everything, but maybe one thing. So I stayed. I helped. I listened. He turned to the judge. I'm not family. I don't own that house. But I've seen how she keeps it alive. That place don't belong to any piece of paper. It belongs to the woman who wakes up every day and keeps it standing. Silas laughed. You think a speech saves her? Lane looked him dead in the eye. I think the truth saves her. The judge leaned back, rubbed his temples. It's not my place to weigh the worth of a life lived. I only have the paper. Joelle felt something twist in her gut. It wasn't over. Not yet. After the hearing, the judge said he'd give a decision in 2 days. The room emptied. Silas walked out with that smirk on his face. Dell didn't show up at all. Outside, the wind picked up. Rain started to spit. Joelle stood on the steps, arms crossed. You didn't have to say all that. I did, Lane said. I needed to. She nodded. Quiet. I'm scared. Me too. They walked home together, heads down against the wind. That night, they lit a fire and sat on the floor. Joelle finally asked what the boy's name was. Lane looked into the flames. I never knew. She took his hand, held it tight. The next day, they rebuilt the garden, dug new rows, pulled weeds. Rain came, but they didn't stop. Their hands were caked in mud, their clothes soaked, but they kept going. Lane laughed once, just a short breath, but it was real. Joelle smiled. At sunset, Miss Edna came by with a pie. Peach, she said, the kind your mama used to make. Joelle stared at it for a second, then hugged her. The morning after, a writer from town brought the letter. Judge's ruling. Joelle read it slow, lips moving with each word. The deed was invalid. No witness. No legal standing. The house was hers. She sat down hard on the porch step. Lane watched her, afraid to breathe. She didn't cry. She just looked up at him and whispered, "We can plan tomorrow." He knelt beside her, forehead to hers. You sure? She smiled, small and tired. Yeah, I'm sure. Lane exhaled like it was the first time in years. That night, they slept side by side for the first time. No fear, no distance, just warmth. And in the dark, Lane whispered the boy's name. David. Joelle squeezed his hand. He'd be proud of you. Maybe he would. Maybe he wouldn't. But for the first time in a long while, Lane felt something close to peace. And that was enough. The mornings felt different now. Not because the sky was any clearer or the wind any softer, but because Joelle didn't wake up alone. Lane's arm rested across her waist, heavy and warm. The way he breathed, slow, steady, almost careful, made her want to stay still just a little longer. For years, she'd learned how to brace herself before her feet hit the floor, how to prepare for the weight of silence. Now, when she opened her eyes, she heard a breath beside hers. Not loud, not clinging, just there. The court's decision had ended the legal fight, but it didn't erase the stares in town, the whispers still clinging like dust on dry boots. Folks didn't change overnight, but Joelle didn't shrink anymore when she walked past them. She didn't lower her voice or hide her hands behind her back. She stood straighter. And Lane, always a few steps behind or beside, never in front, never pushing, just followed where she led. The house felt more alive, too. Not fixed, not perfect, but steadier. The porch had a new beam. The kitchen window no longer rattled when the wind blew. And the garden, oh, the garden, rows of green pushing through dark soil, stubborn and hopeful. Joelle spent hours in it, sleeves rolled, nails caked with dirt, humming the same soft tune her mama used to sing when she canned peaches. Lane had taken to writing again. Not letters. He never sent any, but notes. Thoughts. Pieces of memory he needed to let out before they stuck too deep. He kept them folded in a small tin by Ethan's old bed. Joelle found them once. Read only the top line. It's easier to breathe near her. She didn't say anything about it. She just closed the lid and let the warmth settle behind her ribs. They didn't call it love, not out loud. Neither of them needed the word. It was in the way Joel poured coffee before Lane asked, in the way Lane pulled her into his side when thunder rolled through, in the silence they shared at dusk when words got in the way of the comfort already there. One evening, Miss Edna brought over a bundle of cloth and a smirk on her face. "You'll need these," she said, placing baby blankets on the table. Joel blinked. Lane dropped his fork. "I ain't." Joel started laughing. "I know," Edna said, "but one day you might. And when you do, that child's gonna need something soft in this hard world." Joel folded the blankets slowly. "Thank you." Edna left with a wink, her cane clicking against the steps. That night, Lane pulled Joel close and whispered, "Would that scare you? A child?" She thought about it, then shook her head. "Not if it was with you." He kissed her shoulder, gently, as if the question itself had been a fragile thing. Days passed, then weeks. The wind turned warmer. Summer edged in slow and golden. Joel started selling eggs again, 10 cents a dozen. Lane fixed fences for folks who once eyed him like a threat. He never asked for payment, but they brought bread, tools, even old books in return. The town wasn't kind, not all at once, but it had softened at the edges. Enough to let them live. Dell drifted off eventually. Said he was heading toward Kansas, chasing a job. Joel didn't ask questions. Didn't offer a place to stay this time. When he hugged her goodbye, he mumbled something about how he'd tried, but it sounded more like an apology than a truth. Silas Ward didn't show his face again. Word was he'd gone back east, bitter and broke, talking too loud in saloons about a land he almost had. But no one listened anymore. One afternoon, Joelle stood by her garden fence, eyes on the clouds. Rain was coming. She could feel it at her knees. Lane came up behind her, slid a hand around her waist. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous," she teased. He smiled, kissed her temple. "I want to build something behind the house. Just a small room. For writing. For quiet." She nodded. "You should. And maybe, if you're willing, we could build one more." She turned to him. "What kind?" He held her gaze. "For a child. Someday." Joelle didn't cry, but something deep inside her softened, loosened. She placed her hand on his chest. "Then let's build slow. The right way." The next few weeks were filled with sawdust and sun. Lane drew plans. Joelle helped measure. They argued once over the width of the window, but ended up laughing about it over lemonade. By the end of summer, the room stood sturdy, unfinished but real. Lane placed one of Edna's blankets on the shelf, just in case. Sometimes, at night, they'd lie together on the porch, stars scattered above them like seeds in the dark. "Do you ever wish you'd left?" Joelle asked once, her head on his chest. "No," Lane said without pause. "But I used to think I'd be safer if I had. And now," he took her hand, traced his thumb across her knuckles. "Now I know that peace isn't the absence of fear. It's knowing who's beside you when it comes." She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, her dreams were quiet. Autumn arrived with crisp air and yellow leaves. Joelle wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she gathered eggs, humming. Lane watched her from the steps, coffee in hand, a small smile playing on his lips. She turned. "What are you looking at?" "Everything I never thought I deserved." She walked toward him, placed a hand on his cheek. "We both earned this. Every inch." They sat in silence for a long while, the kind of silence that doesn't press or demand, just settles around you like an old quilt. Comfortable. Whole. Later that night, as wind rustled the trees and the lantern cast soft shadows on the wall, Lane reached for Joelle's hand beneath the covers. "I love you," he said, voice barely above a whisper. She didn't flinch, didn't freeze. "I know," she said, smiling. "I've known for a while." And when she finally said the words back, they came like breath, unforced, essential. They didn't plan a wedding. They didn't need white dresses or rings. But one morning, Joelle wrote Lane's under her last name in the ledger at the store, and the clerk smiled without a word. They weren't perfect. They still argued. Lane still had nightmares. Joelle still flinched sometimes at thunder or heavy footsteps. But they had each other, and they had the land. And they had a quiet understanding that not everything broken had to be fixed. Some things just needed someone to stay. That winter, the first snow came late. Joelle stood at the window watching it fall. Lane came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her middle. "It's sticking," she whispered. "It'll melt," he said. "Some things don't." He kissed the back of her neck. "That's the good part." And outside, the snow fell steady, covering everything in white, while inside the house, warmth bloomed slow and certain. Not loud, not perfect, but real, always real.